Hello and welcome to Optimal Game State. Today we are going to be looking at, Warcry and maybe the future of Warcry. So we've just had the announcement of what's coming up in the previews at Adepticon, and Warcry unfortunately isn't there. And look, that's okay. I was hoping it would be in it. I've mentioned in some of the previous videos I was expecting it to be in it, but you know I still have faith that we are going to see a third edition of Warcry, and it'll be sometime in the summer. Now, yeah, we'll have to see when the announcement is going to come. I might be completely wrong on it. We might be looking at something later. But we had some positive news in relation to the withdrawal of Warcry products from stores, which has happened. But the stores were told to hold on to their the shelf displays to indicate Warcry. So, expectation is something's coming soon, and something is we're getting a new edition of Warcry, but it is not going to be announced at Adepticon, alas. So we'll have to wait a little bit longer. Now, what we're going to look at in this video is essentially let's say Warcry is completely gone, and we want to keep playing Warcry. Obviously, what you can do is you can keep using the rules we currently have and all the warbands we currently have. What I'm doing in this video is I'm coming off of the video I just did on the channel, which was looking at the Frostgrave boxes. Now, the Frostgrave boxes are very, very cool because they are so customizable. So with the Frostgrave Knights box, so basically there's a body, a head, and then there's two arms. And then those arms have, shields, two-hand weapons, bows, swords, like tons of stuff that you can kind of customize and make your own guys out of. And then they have soldier boxes, barbarian boxes, cultist boxes, boxes for wizards. What else? There's probably a few others I'm missing, but they've got a ton of stuff. And all those boxes are compatible with each other, so you can kind of cross over things. You can do a lot of fun stuff. So it has very much of a feel of kind of Mordheim and kind of the old style GW stuff. So we've got all these models. And what I wanted to do, and what I'm going to talk about in this video, is making Warcry rules for it. So we're going to try leverage off of the main Warcry rule set. We're not really going to change that much, but what we are going to do is we're going to look at making profiles. Now, when I was looking at that and considering it, this is what I kind of came up with, and this is partially inspired by Mordheim, which, Frostgrave kind of picks up off on. So on the left-hand side, we've got the idea of a Youngblood, a Warrior, Champion, and a Captain. So obviously the Youngblood is the least experienced, Warrior next, then Champion, then Captain. In Warcry, we have one leader, which would be the captain, and then we have two other heroes, which would be the two champions. And we don't really have a distinction between Warrior and Youngblood, but we do have Chaff and mid-tier chunky boys, which would be kind of the Warrior level. If you were looking at Frostgrave, the captain would normally be replaced with your wizard. And then I don't think there's necessarily a champion equivalent. You could look at the specialists. So you can get a certain number of specialists that often are better armored, better equipped, and then you have the rest of them who are if the warriors would be kind of your standard soldiers, and then your young bloods would be the thieves, and what's the other? There's another one that's free. A tug is the other one. So thieves and tugs might be considered youngbloods. And then we're looking at some of the profiles. So we've roughly split in the middle category the melee weapons into like daggers, which kind of everyone should have a dagger. A hand weapon, which is kind of pretty broad. We'll see if we can expand it out later. A spear, which is a catch-all for kind of reach weapons, and then grade weapons, which is anything two-handed. And then for range weapons, we've got shortbow, crossbow, longbow. And because I'm looking at the Frostgrave kits, the wizard kit actually has a few wands, so I want to include that in there. Now, you could also have pistols. The Frostgrave ones didn't have pistols, but I imagine it'll be relatively easy to do. Essentially, you're probably looking at the crossbow, but trying to put some additional elements into it. So this is broadly what we want to make. We want to make a fighter profile and a weapon profile. Now, Warcry is structured currently to have all of that done all at once. So you don't pick a grot and then work out what armor he has and work out what weapon the grot is equipped with. Instead, you get a grot, and that grot is equipped with stuff. And when we're looking at Mordheim, what you'll often do is you'll look into the warband for for more time, and it'll say exactly which weapon options each type of fighter has. And sorry, to be specific, the Youngblood Warrior Champion and Captain comes out of the Mercenary group. Different warbands within Wartime will have different kind of categories for those, but that one looked good. And often what they'll have is they'll have a limited weapon selection. So maybe you can only give the champions great weapons, and the Youngbloods can only get daggers, and the Warriors have access to hand weapons and some range weapons, which and then your captain has access to whatever they want, basically. So what we're going to do here is we're going to try build them separately. Now, the way I've been doing this is I've been looking at the Warcry card creator, and in there you will find a points calculator. Now, what the points calculator does, as currently designed, is it works out. So it makes two assumptions. One is the assumption that the health is linear to points. The second assumption is that damage is linear to points. So it works out health, it works out damage, and then it averages them out, or it works out what the points would be, and then averages that out to get a kind of final figure, or a figure. And then what it does is it looks at some scalar values. So if you've got more movement, or if you've got more toughness, then you get charged a percentage more. That seems to be the way it works. I've had relatively good results with it, and I'm pretty happy with it this way. Now, what I've done for these ones is I have set the attacks to 0. So that does 0 damage. And then I'm able to look at how much points a fighter would be. So for 10 wounds, 3 toughness, 4 move, I'll talk about strength in a second, it's around 40 points. That's what you can get. So now we have a baseline, we have an idea, and let's quickly go through them. So it's 10 to 18 is scaling up, with 18 being the toughest. All of these have toughness 3 because that's basically what the toughness of a fighter is an unarmed fighter or lightly armed human fighter in Warcry is. Now, when you're looking at this, do make sure that you set the range of weapons to 0. So there's no scaling problems. You should see the percentages. That should make sense. Similarly, we've got 4 move because all of the humans start at 4 move. Now, there might be ways to increase that speed or slow them down, but this is a human profile. And look, if you wanted to, you could do similar for any of the other fighter profiles, any of the races. You could give your elves 5 move, reduce their wounds a little bit or something like that. And, you can work out a profile that is suitable just for the fighter. Now, what I have done here is I have included strength, which normally would be a weapon profile trait. But I wanted to include it in this because it's often included on the character side. So the idea is that a champion should be a little bit better at a sword than a Youngblood necessarily would be, even though the sword profile is going to be the same. Okay, hopefully all that makes sense. So let's have a look over at weapons. So to do this, what I did was I set the health to 0 on the calculator. Again, made sure that there was no scalars that were unexpected. So no scalars we want to set the toughness to 4, the move to 4, and then the wounds to 0. So those are kind of the averages. Those are the assumption of 0. Now, what have we done here? So that dagger should actually be worth about 20 points, but we're going to make it free, just so every fighter with nothing equipped has a weapon. Now, it's kind of the crappiest you can get. As you can see, I put the strength for it down as S, which means the strength of the fighter. Then we upgrade it slightly, so that's +1/+1 to damage, and that gets you a normal hand weapon. So it's going to be a sword or an axe, and it'll be wielded one-handed. Spear is basically the same, except it does have reach, so it has a reach of 2. It only gives an extra 5 points, or costs an extra 5 points, but it's a thing. It sets the spear or halberd or whip or whatever you want to do, sets it slightly different to the hand weapon. And then lastly, we have the great weapon, which has +1 attack, +1 crit, but not +1 damage, and then the strength is getting a +1 bonus. So if you are a champion, which would be strength 4, and you're wielding a great weapon, you're going to be strength 5. So it'll be 4, 5, 2, 4. And that'll be 65 points. And quickly, just go back. So that would be 65 and 65. So it's going to be 130 points. And yeah, I don't know. That kind of feels right for what that kind of fighter would be. Now, we have a couple of other things that we're going to be customizing these with, and these are very generic. These, aren't a kind of a full range things. So let's have a quick look at some of the range weapons. So ranges increase. So I've got the wand at the very end. That's kind of a weird one, but short bow, crossbow, longbow increases in range. Notably, these are the short bow and the longbow are based on strength. So someone with higher strength is going to do more damage on it. The longbow has better range and better damage, but costs an extra 20 points. The crossbow is 4 already, which is a nice bonus, but it is chunky. It's costing 65 points for that. And similarly, the wand, which has lower range, but does have slightly better crit damage, is costing 70, which is a little bit better. Now, what's going to have these is kind of up to you. You're probably not going to be dishing out wands to non-wizards. So there's probably a limitation where it has to be a wizard before you can actually include that. How you evaluate that or what that actually means otherwise, that's all kind of part of the background of the game, however you want to do things. Okay, this bit's a little bit more interesting. What we want to do here is we want to kind of evaluate differences or exceptions. Okay, so the idea of a dual weapon. So this is a person wielding 2 swords or 2 daggers or whatever. Oh, actually, that's a point. The daggers. No, that didn't work for the daggers. So I need to put the daggers back to 20 points rather than free. But then, have them cost 20 points, and then first one will be free. Okay, that makes sense. But the idea here is if you're wielding 2, then you're going to get an extra +1 onto your attack rolls. The disadvantage is if you've got a weapon in your offhand, you're not going to be able to carry a shield. Shield is going to require means that you cannot have the great weapon. The great weapon is going to be 2-handed, and it's only going to cost an extra 10 points. Medium armor costs more, so it costs 15 points rather than 10, but you can do medium armor with 2 swords, or you could do medium armor with a great weapon. Now, it is also possible to do medium armor plus shield plus no more pluses. So you could go heavy armor plus shield, which would be +3. We're starting the base at 3, so you'd be 6 toughness. But if you're doing that, you have to have a one-handed weapon, so not a great weapon, and you're going to be movement -1, and it's going to cost you that extra 30 points for the heavy armor and 10 points for shield. Hopefully all this makes sense. And now what I did when doing these was basically I took the profiles and then I upped the toughness by 2 and reduced the movement by 1 to try kind of evaluate what we're looking at here. Did I reduce the movement by 1? Actually, I'm not sure if I did actually reduce the movement by 1. Because I don't think it necessarily needs a discount. Let me quickly check that. Okay, after looking at it, I definitely didn't include that -1, but that's okay. That is intentional. So this is quite expensive. It has a penalty, but you are able to get that extra armor. So I'm happy where it's at. I'm not going to be recasting that. So the idea here is you can build your fighter. So you're looking at a human. You can kind of pick which kind of human there are, and if you wanted to, or if this is all kind of looking at it in a toolbox. I haven't firmed anything up. But kind of the expectation is you will have 1 captain, maybe 2 of the champions, and then, a bunch of warriors and maybe 1 or 2 young bloods, depending on what's going on. And we then would work out what armor they have. We would then work out what weapons they have, and then you would end up with a profile. So good so far. So good, yeah. Now, let's have a look here. So these are all the standard abilities. So this is something that everyone has. I've added captain or champion only to the bottom of inspiring presence, just because we're not going to be using rune marks for this. Now, obviously you could use rune marks, but all that section then is going to be saying is you need the hero rune mark to use these abilities. What do we do for other abilities, though? It certainly is a question. Now, the way Warcry currently does it is it gives a warband certain abilities, and then out of those abilities, each of the fighters within that warband get those abilities, which is a fine way of doing it, and it's great if you're looking to kind of micromanage and keep the warbands really, really tight. But what we want to do in this case, we want to have a little bit more flexibility. We want to kind of keep things flowing and give more options. Now, one of the great things about the ability system is you've only got so many hero dice. So as long as we keep those values in, you're only going to be able to push out so many doubles and so many triples. So really, we can give you a ton of different weapons. So here's the first idea. So this is Rosamund, and she has a longbow on her back, and she's got a warhammer that she uses with great gusto. So this is obviously an RPG character, and I've just put together the way I felt the character would look. Okay, so let's talk about the longbow first. I have given the longbow the volley ability. That is to say, anyone who picks up a longbow gets to use the volley ability. Now, this is from one of the existing warbands. What it does is it adds half of the triple, rounding up to the attack's characteristic of the next missile attack action. So you just get a boost. You turn your triple into a boosted damage on that longbow. Now, if we have an ability here for each of the weapons, then all of a sudden, you can kind of pick and choose. Whenever you get a weapon, you get something along with it. So now, obviously, for the range items, that's a little bit more like we were already talking about longbow, shortbow, crossbow. Like we've already got quite specific there. But when we're doing it for the hand weapons, like we're doing here, so this is a warhammer. It's just a one-handed hand weapon. What we're seeing is a way to differentiate between them. So we have the profile, but we've also given this particular part, the warhammer or hammers in general, this concussion ability. So it's a double. Until the end of the fighter's activation, add the value of this ability to the strength characteristic of melee attack actions made by this fighter. So we've kept each of those separate. So we could, if we wanted, be specific and say made by the warhammer attack. In this case, it's actually fine because the volley attack and the warhammer attack are distinct. But we probably should tidy it up and say, made by this weapon or made by a weapon with concussion, just in case you decide to pick two different weapons and then try use either ability with. Anyway, so this is a double, and it just, you can put a little bit more weight behind it because you're smashing through with the warhammer. We can do this for all the weapons. We can have an axe, a higher crit rate because it's piercing. We can. Would you have like a fear effect for pistols? Anyway, we can go through them, and actually, there are a number of abilities. If you go to Warcry, and then you look at the bottom, there's a link to the Mordheim equivalent for it, and then you can kind of look through some of the abilities they have there, and you can see if there's an option of something that you can use instead. Again, I'm not giving the completed version. What I'm probably going to do is I'm going to put together something for myself and try it out, and then there's a lot of refining before it actually tidies up. But the idea here is that we would go through and we would take each of the weapons and we would give each weapon a profile based on the ones we've already looked at, but then also a double or a triple to go along with it, and then anyone with that weapon has that double or triple. So it gives a lot of flexibility. Where else can we do it? So the idea here is to have skills, to give a champion and give a captain a certain skill brackets that they can use, and then out of those skills they can pick another ability. So here we have Strike to Stun, which is a triple, and this is because Rosamund in the role-playing game we have does have the Strike to Stun ability, which means she always goes for the head, and if she succeeds at an attack, basically there's an opposed, her strength versus the target's endurance. And if she succeeds, she stuns them a little. They lose a few actions. So that's what I want to portray here. And what we're doing is if they successfully crit, and it has to be using the Warhammer, then the enemy fighter loses an action. It is a triple. It's highly unlikely you're going to see 2 triples in a turn. So we're probably only going to be like bonking them for 1 action rather than 2, which is insanely good. But it is a triple, which would normally get you an action. And in this case, they're going to be losing an action. And they're only going to lose an action if they have an action to lose. So it's not going to do anything to someone who's already acted. Okay, so how are we doing it here? So the idea here would be that we have a skill, we assign a skill to a fighter, and then each fighter with that skill can pick abilities out of that group. So Rosamund is only ever going to have brawn skills. She is not going to have book learning, academic style. She's not going to have finesse stuff. She's a creature of physicality and beating things up. That's who she is. So we might have a case where we end up adding or giving more triples, more options to her. The great thing about the Warcry system is there is a limit on the number that you can trigger. So it doesn't actually matter if you have a ton of abilities because you're only able to use so much. So it is actually very, very hard to really, really break something. And if you do, it will be evident very, very quickly because that will essentially be the only ability you're using. Now, I will need to, this idea of having essentially traits for weapons and traits for fighters will require a little bit of tidying up on the Warcry card generator if I want to do it. Because I need to move things around slightly just to give myself the room for it. But it seems interesting, and it seems like something that if we had a kind of campaign system, Rosamund might be able to pick up another ability, another skill to go along with it. And then, what we could do is we could have skill cards that go along with her and place those skill cards underneath. So the ability would kind of pick up. So you would have just the weapons up front, and then you might have, in the same way we're doing blessings, but we would have abilities that would be only in the brawn group, and then she could kind of build them up as she leveled through. And I think that's probably a good way of leveling, giving them more abilities, rather than what we have been doing previously, which has been, increasing strength, increasing toughness. I think that way can get a little bit dangerous because that's a direct points change. But when we give more abilities to people as a leveling up system, we are in a great place because you still only use so many abilities a turn. It just gives you more options. And I think that feels right. So, if we have Rosamund with 3 abilities going up another player who is playing, a similar fighter with the kind of same setup, but they've only got Strike the Stone, they don't have the 3 brawn abilities that our Rosamund does, it'll be actually a relatively fair game. Rosamund will have more options, but it's not like the other player will have less stats or anything going on. So all good. I think that's probably a better way of playing campaign than ever before. Here we have some abilities. So these are just a couple of examples that I picked out through the system. And literally what we're going to be doing for this is we're going to be going through and finding existing abilities that we felt were reasonable and fair and using them. They're there. We might need to reword things, we might need to update things, but it's relatively straightforward. These are all abilities we've seen before, nothing surprising. For some of them, we'll be able to move them over. So that's that spine-crushing blow was the one I was using for the Warhammer. It's just a matter of using the existing ones and kind of working out with thematic. If we were going to look down those skill trees, this is coming from More Time Again, just as an example. So this is a bunch of skill trees and then a bunch of abilities that you could take. So if we were to have these, so shooting, did I use shooting twice? Oh, I did do shooting twice. I wonder what should be there. I might be missing some. Anyway, the idea here is that you kind of lock yourself into a particular type of abilities, and we just then need to make sure we've got a decent set of abilities in there. And then if you're to level up, you'd only be taking shooting skills. Or, as does happen in Wartime and does happen in Necromunda, maybe a fighter has access to 2 sets of skills rather than just 1. Yeah, so like you could have your champions only have 1 set of skills, and you could have your captain start with 2. So you might be able to pick Mighty Blow and Strike to Injure if you're to have combat and strength. Anyway, just an idea. It's just a framework. This is the idea. It's just to kind of look at the core parts of Warcry, pull them apart, and work out what we can do if GW wasn't there and we were completely free to do whatever we want. This is my cultists. So this is what I'm going to be sending my a bunch of heroes up against. This is from the cultist set that Frostgrave have, and I've meddled around with. Meddled around with a few bits and pieces, so you can see that the guy in the center is now has like a wizard scroll that he's reading from, and then the helm is again another wizard option. So we have a dark sorcering, summoning, or something nefarious going on, and I've got him on some of the Archon Studio tiles terrain. So yeah, I can make some stats for them, and then I can build some specialized profiles for these guys, and then we can play a game. Points should be relatively similar because we are looking at profiles essentially. Now, you have to be kind of careful with the abilities because an ability can kind of really overshoot things, especially if there are ones where you're getting a lot of damage or you're getting a lot of health or something like that, or even a lot of speed sometimes. The ones that affect the direct profiles can have a big shift in what kind of the evaluation of points, if that makes sense. But we can play a game, and because of the hero system, kind of keeps those abilities nice and tight. Once we have the profile points in a solid state, we are then able to just get out there and have some fun. And it'll probably take a little bit of fine tuning. And if you were to do this yourself, what you'd probably end up doing is you'd probably do both sides of an encounter, test it out, and then introduce your friend to it. If you wanted to do this as more of a campaign, what you would need to do is you would need to write up a sense of abilities, write up a full kind of sheet where everyone kind of agrees on what you have and kind of getting a consensus. But you've got the core Warcry rules in there. We can see what the point cost for most fighters would be, what the advantages and disadvantages would be, and then and it's just a matter of kind of penciling in the abilities and working out how you do it. I do think for a campaign system, opening up extra abilities sounds great. So what you could have is have XP for each fighter, and then once they reach so much XP, then give them an extra ability. Relatively straightforward system. You would need to work out how you're generating that XP, how many points are involved, and also you'd need to look at gold. So gold, if you wanted to, could be used to buy new weapons, upgrade your guys, upgrade their gear, get everyone in heavy armor if you really wanted to. You probably would need to kind of put a bunch of limitations in. So obviously I've talked about hands, which I think is implied but maybe not directly said in the slides. Like, you cannot have a shield and a two-handed weapon, or a shield and a crossbow, or something like that. But also you might have some other things like wizards in the Wolfrup setting, unless they're metal, school of metal, they don't have armor. They go in cloth. And beasts, wizards of the realm of beasts do have leather armor. So there are kind of some exceptions, but largely that's a kind of case. If they're a wizard, then they are in cloth armor. So it's going to mean they're going to be toughness 3. But hopefully, if we have it done right, there should be a ton of fun abilities that they can key off of. And again, I would keep it to abilities. Give them wands. In this case, you can see Leonora has a scythe, which is just going to be a spear. Basically, the profile will be for a spear, but maybe the side will have some special extra rules, or because she is a mage of the Lord of Death, she might have an extra ability or two that will let her zap people and absorb their life, something along those lines. But it'll all be coming off the ability system, so it should be relatively straightforward. So I hope you enjoyed this. I know it is quite raw. It is definitely unrefined, but the Frostgrave series of miniatures is cool, And obviously, you don't necessarily need to go for Frostgrave. There's lots of different options out there. You don't have to stick with humans either. You can put together a profile for rattlings and for goblins, and do an entire piece just set underground between those two factions. We can do the mythical I keep calling them rattlings. It's my alpha working in Skaven. We could do the mythical Skaven v Skaven, where you just have rat profiles and you have their weapons and abilities, and you kind of do it from that. The world is your oyster. Unfortunately, it does involve a little bit of work, and it does involve some decisions. But I think it could be quite rewarding to basically make the game that you want to make, play the miniatures you want to play, and still have Warcry. So, thank you very much for listening. And yeah, have a great week.
Thanks for making it all the way to the end. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Each week I put up a new video talking about one of Games Workshop's specialist games. The goal is always to try and make the best possible two-player experience. If this is something you'd find interesting, please subscribe to the channel and comment to let me know what you'd like to see in future.